Let's take a look at commas and compound sentences today. So there are two golden rules with commas that we'll take a look at for Unit 1. The first one is do not put single commas between required slots. We find this on page 50 of our textbook. So by that, we mean that anytime we have a slot between a subject and a verb, or from a verb to its complement, whether that be a predicate nominative or a predicate adjective or a direct object, we don't put commas between those slots. So if I wrote a family of hobos has been living in our backyard shed for weeks, well, this comma right there would be wrong because I wouldn't separate a subject from a verb with a comma. Or if I said, the lanky man in the green spandex with the dance moves of an erratic grasshopper is Mr. Fisher. Once again, this comma is wrong. Now, I find this happens a lot because we have these really long subjects and we take a natural breath after the word grasshopper, but that's not a reason to put a comma in. This is still one big subject going into the verb, so therefore that comma should go away. The second golden rule we have on commas reads, for nearly all compound pairs of words, phrases, and clauses within a sentence, use no comma with the conjunction. So when we're talking about a pair, we're talking about two. And we use the conjunction, is the other key word in this golden rule, as a way of joining a pair or two words, phrases, or clauses. So there are 11 conjunctions. We know that there are coordinating conjunctions, which spell out fanboys, and there are also the correlative conjunctions, which don't spell out anything. And so those conjunctions can be used to join a pair, but we don't use a comma because the conjunction does the job. So that means there's no comma when you join a pair of subjects, when you join a pair of verbs, a pair of direct objects, a pair of prepositional phrases. So if I said Mr. Heiser and his sparkly unicorn led the parade, and there he is. In this case, I have two subjects, Mr. Heiser and unicorn. There's no reason for a comma to separate Mr. Heiser from unicorn. It's just a pair of subjects. If I said Mr. Heiser pranced through the hallways and freely gave out noogies to the students, once again, no commas, because I have just simply two verbs, and a diagram would show you that visually, and that's the reason why there's no comma after hallways. If I said Mr. Heiser invited the hippie and his family into his home after accepting the pamphlet on inner peace, there's no comma after hippie. This is just simply two direct objects, and so there's no comma after hippie for a pair of direct objects. And lastly, if I said Mr. Heiser motivated his math students with intensity and with a touch of insanity, once again, there's no comma after intensity. This is just a pair of prepositional phrases. So the second golden rule, when I'm dealing with a pair of subjects, verbs, direct objects, prep phrases, there's no reason for any comma at all. So when it comes to joining a pair of sentences together, that's different. That's when you're going to use grammar glue. And the grammar glue to join a compound sentence together is going to use a comma with one of those conjunctions that we've already listed. So if I said the critics had their doubts, comma, but brand new sentence, the Eagles overcame the odds. We can see there are two sentences on both sides of that comma conjunction. That's why it works. I said I was so bored with this lesson, comma, so I began reading the strange posters on the wall. The comma so is the grammar glue to join two full sentences on both sides. Not only does Mr. Cantrell occasionally poke lazy art students with his poking stick, but he also taunts them with his troll toes. Here I've used the correlative conjunction, not only but also, and I still use a comma to join those two halves together. Be careful, sometimes we forget to use but and also when we use not only. Sometimes people will say not only but, or they'll say not only also, and they've left out part of the conjunction. Don't be like those people. Mrs. Swore loaded up on a six-pack of Red Bull before class and danced erratically for her class for her homeroom. The problem's going to be, notice here how I use a comma and, but after that comma and, it's not a full sentence, and that's a red flag because I have to have a full sentence both in front and behind the comma conjunction. So therefore, if it's not a full sentence, this comma goes away. I just simply have two verbs. No reason for a comma at all. What if I said this? Mrs. Swore loaded up on a six-pack of Red Bull before class, comma, then danced erratically for her homeroom. Well, that's another problem. Think about it. The word then is not on your list of conjunctions. It's not a fanboy. There's no T in the word fanboys. And so then is not a conjunction. It shouldn't take a comma at all. This is what we would call one of the notas. These are not a conjunction. And therefore, they try linking two sentences together, and people use them a lot, and the SAT knows that. So they'll give it to you as a lot of SAT questions. We have to recognize the comma then won't happen. Here are other knowledge to be careful of on the SAT. Comma however, comma moreover, comma furthermore, comma nevertheless, comma therefore, comma for example, comma hence, comma thus, comma for instance. These are just examples. They're really nice transitional words, but they don't take commas. As we'll find in a later lesson, they work really well with semicolons, but not really well with commas. So therefore, I still have two verbs. I have Mrs. Swore loaded up, and I have Mrs. Swore danced. So if I have two verbs, I need a conjunction, but I certainly don't need a comma. So I can simply say, and then danced. If you really like the word then, that's fine. It's kind of a useless word, but if you want to use it, go ahead. But you have to have the word and. The word then isn't doing anything at all in the sentence, but the word and is joining those two verbs together. Mr. Doherty winked at me while I was teaching. However, I tried to ignore it. Well, once again, there's a very common however as a nod that the SAT would use. Comma, however, is not going to join those two thoughts together. Maybe you mean the word but. Oftentimes, these words which we want to use have a nice little replacement from a conjunction list. So I can replace the word however with but, and the comma can remain. The last thing we'll take a look at is being vigilant against these two grammar villains, the running man and the fragmenter. So the running man gives us run-on sentences, which is when we slap two or more simple sentences together without proper grammar glue. So examples: Mr. Cantrell loves to paint floating bananas. He is a talented artist. Well, there's all kinds of ways of fixing this. One way is making it into two separate sentences. Her father's a pastor. She secretly smokes cigarettes and practices witchcraft. Well, I could certainly make these into two separate sentences. I could also make it compound, comma, yet she secretly smokes cigarettes and practices witchcraft. I didn't get any candy for Halloween. I stole yours. Classic run on. Another way of solving this one is to maybe make the first part, as we're going to find later, called an adverb clause. But maybe a word like because might be a nice way of kind of easing into this. Because I didn't get any candy for Halloween, I stole yours. The punctuation there might be a little off for you to say the word because and then put a comma after Halloween, but we'll get to that eventually. But just trust me, that's one way of fixing a run on. And lastly is the fragmenter, who gives us incomplete sentences, only a fragment or a part of the whole. So if I say Mr. Houck demonstrating his epic breakdancing moves during class, well, a common error in fragments is to use an ing verb, but there's no helper, and there needs to be a helper for that ing. So I could say Mr. Houck has been demonstrating his breakdancing, his epic breakdancing moves. Or even though the pudding was clearly outdated. Another common error with fragments is to use a transitional word, but you didn't use the transitional word, you used something different, which we call a subordinating conjunction. Even though is kind of throwing this off. Do you realize if I took out the word even though and put in the word however, it would be fine? However, the pudding was clearly outdated, and that one actually would work. And lastly, the English class that nobody likes. Sometimes you write a sentence and it looks like you have like a verb in there, but you notice that the word likes goes with nobody, but class doesn't really have a verb. It's almost like you kind of said the English class, sidestep that nobody likes, and you actually never finished your sentence. So finish your sentence. The English class that nobody likes is advanced grammar. So this is our notes on run-ons and fragments, as well as our notes on compound sentences. I think I may have butchered that, but you get the point. All right.